Yes, welcome in. We are back, a little delayed than we normally are. Schedule a little off this week. Some personal stuff popping up. Jesse, not positive to have to spend a couple days at the hospital. Not for myself, of course, but family-wise. So apologize for the delay in getting the show out. However, for the first time in the show's history, news broke that we actually get to talk about. So positives abound.
I suppose that is one way to look at it. Yes, we do have an uncanny ability on this show to record only to have something explode 10 minutes later. So that is accurate. We have some
Yeah.
Chez Mellusi news to discuss.
Yeah, that did not happen yet. So, not doing a show yesterday. We were able to get the news out from Chez Mellusi last night and do the show this morning as Wisconsin gets ready to take on Purdue tomorrow morning. We will get into that. Also, going to get into Jesse's story, discussing with former players what they see from the current era, the current Fickell era so far here at this point. A lot of good quotes: Joe Thomas, Joe Schobert, some other guys, Barry Alvarez, obviously, as well. And we'll get to that. And then we'll make our week 6 picks coming up. You finally had a bad week. You finally had a not great week. You went 2-4-1. I went 3-3-1. So, yay me. There's that. But before we do, again, the best vintage apparel you can possibly find comes from Homefield. They are the official apparel sponsor of the camp, and they just released these new jackets this week. They are 90s themed, essentially pullovers, and Wisconsin is included in it. It's got Wisconsin on the front, little motion W on the side, and it's a good looking jacket. But they also have a ton more up on homefieldapparel.com. Go check it out. Use the promo code Bucky24 for 15% off your first purchase. All right, let's jump into this. News broke Thursday afternoon or Thursday night that Chez Mellusi is no longer with the program. He's leaving the program. It's not to say that he can't come back, but he is leaving to focus on his health, according to a statement from UW.
Yeah, well, first of all, this is just awful for Chez. He's been through so much here at Wisconsin, injured every year, and came here with so much promise and looked really good in 2021 before he got hurt, suffered the season-ending ACL injury against Rutgers. I think if you total up the games that he missed to date, it was something like 17 games and had 2 season-ending injuries in 3 seasons. Obviously, this year, from what we saw on the field, just didn't necessarily look like the Chez that we saw when he was at his best, even before the Purdue injury last season. And so now he's choosing to step away and try and rehab. I don't know what the future holds for him. I do think, at least to some degree, it's notable that this is occurring after 4 games. That timing would seem to indicate that potentially, if he wants to petition the NCAA for another year, that he would do so. On the other hand, I don't know whether that's in the cards. Do you want to be there for 7 years, wherever it is? But it probably depends on how that rehab process goes. Kudos to him, at least, for realizing where his body is at and doing what he feels is best for himself, because that's what matters most.
I'll be honest, Jesse, I'm a little conflicted. Not with Chez. Chez has fought through a ton of injuries, right? Like very few people will continue to fight what he's fought through to get to this point. The 4 games is certainly a huge blinking red light, though, saying, you're not leaving the team unless you potentially want to play another year. Because why would you leave a program to rehab injuries? Why, unless he's like leaving and going someplace and rehabbing injuries at a like spot where that's what they do. That's all they do, which I guess is certainly a possibility, right? Like as a 6-year guy, how much school is actually taking place for him at this point. So that is, but like if it's just straight up, I want to leave, or I'm stepping away because of these injuries, and I want to go rehab them. I feel like Wisconsin might be the best place to rehab those injuries. Hand up, definitely probably wrong on that in terms of there's probably some better places to go, and maybe we'll hear from Chez and where he ends up. But I think the timing here, both with the 4 games and also what Luke Fickell said on Monday, with the idea of trying to zone in and focus in on a few guys as opposed to trying to play 4 guys. Maybe he was going to be one of the guys that might have been odd man out on potentially some of those carries. I mean, he led them in carries last week. He had 10 carries. He's their leading rusher, but maybe they were looking in a different direction.
It certainly leaves a lot open for interpretation where we've got to try and fill in what these things mean. But absolutely, the questions that you're raising are valid because Luke said on Monday that he wanted to try and pare down the rotation. And I think that on the surface, it made sense because it's like you got 4 guys that you're playing, potentially 5 guys. Darian Dupree shows up for the second series, has 2 carries. One of them goes for 10 yards and we don't see him again. Very clearly, he's in the plans for the future. And if he's in your plans for the future, why can't he be in your plans now? Well, you got some other running backs that are taking those carries. I don't know what that would have looked like for Chez. I certainly think he would have been involved, but it wouldn't have been as many carries as he wanted. And I think even Luke alluded to that. Like, there's not going to be someone getting 30 carries. On the other hand, he's kind of split carries the entire time that he's been here when it was with Braylon Allen. So I don't know what his potential role, how that would have factored into the decision-making process, but certainly the running back rotation was going to look different. And now as we spin ahead, we absolutely know that it's going to look different for the rest of this season.
We do. And what does it look like for you? Like if I'm looking at what has taken place so far this year, Chez obviously not 100%. We know Tui Walker's not 100% with that brace on his leg. We're going to do 2 different things here. If we're Phil Longo and Devin Spalding, who would you put in there right now? Not who would you want to put in there right now, but if you're there, if from their point of view, who are you putting in this rotation right now?
So if Tui Walker is good enough to go, I think he's your number 1 based on what he's demonstrated. Now, the health factor plays a big role in this. Cade Giacomelli is actually the leading rusher among the guys that are still here. I think he's got 153 yards rushing, some of that because he's broken off a couple big runs.
He's averaging 7.3 yards a carry.
Yeah. And Tui's got 147, but he's also got 3 rushing touchdowns, and Cade doesn't have any. So I think those are 2. To me, though, this comes down to what do you want Darian Dupree's role to be, and potentially Dylan Jones. But again, if Luke is saying you want to pare down the rotation, I don't think you're throwing 2 freshmen into the mix. I do think one of them deserves an opportunity. And as I said, if Darian's going to get in on the second series against freaking USC on the road, then that should tell you where the coaching staff believes that he's at. So I think his is the role that I'm most intrigued to see in terms of how much it increases. You still can play 3 running backs. Luke even said you want essentially your top guy, your backup, and whoever that spare is going to be. Well, those are your 3. And if Darian gets more carries and shows that he can be the playmaker that we saw this preseason, then I think he gets more of those, because that's the other thing Luke said is you want to figure out who can get hot. And so I think he is the guy that has the highest ceiling from that trio. And it would seem to me that he's at least ahead of Dylan Jones based on the fact that he played last week. So those are the 3 I'm looking at. And maybe it just depends on how each of those guys are performing. But I would expect Giacomelli to be heavily involved at this point too.
Yeah. So that was kind of a mix of what you think is going to happen and what you want to happen. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think Tui Walker is your starter if he's healthy. And I would assume that Cade is the backup, but you want to get Darian Dupree some opportunities to show. Like, those are the 3 in my mind that I think we'll see on the field against Purdue for the most part, with maybe a little bit of Jackson Aker in a blocking role or whatever. I just don't think he's going to get the carries if you want to pare down your rotation.
What about a swing pass out to the left on 3rd and long?
Why not?
I know why not, because it didn't work last week and it's never going to work. Either way, that's irrelevant. I'm going to skip over what Phil Longo and Devin Spalding would do and go to what I would do. And that would be a lot of Cade Giacomelli, a lot of Darian Dupree. Get Tui Walker healthy so that he's not wearing a huge-ass brace on his knee and you're trying to throw him out there and carry a bunch of times. Give me those other 2 guys. And if Dylan Jones is part of it, okay. But I want those other 2 guys. And if I'm having to pick between those 2 guys, give me Darian Dupree all day long. That is the forward-thinking part of this whole equation, as opposed to trying to win this week, which is what obviously they're trying to do and what they think is going to give them the best opportunity to win. But give me Darian Dupree, give me Darian Dupree, give me Darian Dupree.
Yep, I'm with you. I mean, look, we've been talking about him since fall camp for a reason. Obviously, Dylan Jones, too. He's the most versatile running back they have. I want to see what they can do if they get him out of the backfield, maybe try to get him to catch some passes. But I talked about this in the preseason. He could make something out of nothing where it looked like he's dead to rights, and all of a sudden he jukes a guy and he gets a few yards. That's the kind of spark that you need, and I think that they're looking for. What's interesting is this conversation comes up every year, and it can be at any position. Oftentimes it's when you have, say, a freshman quarterback, and fans say, well, why don't we just see this guy because he's the future? And it is a balance that the staff constantly has to strike about trying to win now, which we've discussed, and trying to plan for the future. I think Darian Dupree is the kind of guy who can do both, though. He can help you win now, and he is the future. And so, yes, I think his role is going to increase. I don't know what that looks like, but I would certainly like to see what he can do with more opportunities.
Yeah, and I know some people, like, why would you want to burn that red shirt? They're not doing anything. Well, he's not going to. That's not how college football is anymore. At least in my opinion, unless you're. Yeah, it's just not, especially with a guy like him, and especially I think like a guy like Dylan Jones. Like they want to play. These guys want to play, and if they're not going to play, well, they're going to go somewhere else. So I think that is certainly at least somewhere in Wisconsin's mind when they're thinking about how you're going to handle the rest of the year. But I think first and foremost is about winning, and I understand that, and I would agree with you. I think that certainly Darian Dupree can help them win games, and I guess we'll see coming up on Saturday. Purdue is the closest thing to a get-right game that is on Wisconsin's schedule. They have owned Purdue. They have run through Purdue throughout these last 17 years, or excuse me, 17 games, 20 years since they last lost. And I would expect them to try and do that on Saturday, but I know we'll see plenty of passing as well. But I'm not saying Chez isn't hurt. He's definitely not himself. He's definitely not 100%. And I don't know, because of all the injuries that he's had, I don't know that he's ever going to get back to 100%. You know, like when you have, and they've been different injuries, right? But ACL, the breaking the breaking of the leg and the ankle reconstruction, like it's a lot of wear and tear on your body. And I'm hoping that he can get all the way back and at least give himself a shot to have a shot, right? Like last year at this time, not at this time, but a couple weeks, like the first 4 weeks of the season last year, he looked like a better fit for this offense than Braylon Allen did. And so good luck to him, and always enjoy talking to him, and we'll see exactly how it plays out for him the rest of the way. Let's move on here. You had an opportunity this week. You asked Luke Fickell about some of the comments that have popped up on social media from former players. You saw Jack Sitchy, we've seen Braylon Allen famously at this point. Others have spoken up, J.J. Watt. And you asked Luke Fickell about it, and he kind of like, blinders on. I don't want to really think about that stuff, talk about that stuff. My kids will remind me, or they will make me aware of it. But it's a worthwhile question, and you had an opportunity to chat with Joe Thomas and Barry Alvarez and Joe Schobert, Mike Caputo, going down the list of guys that, have a lot invested in this program through what they did in their time at Madison, and are now having to watch from the outside and being like, I don't know. I'm not sure I'm a fan of what's going on right now.
Yeah, there's a lot to this. I think I'll start by saying that former players are in the same boat that the fans are, where they're frustrated with the on-field results right now. And at the same time, there's this delicate balance that I think everybody has to strike with. Well, this is part of a process. You could kind of compare it to turning around a cruise ship, however you want to describe it. It clearly is not happening immediately. Some people would want it to, even though, it's not like that everywhere. Indiana's a good example where it is. But that I think is notable. Barry Alvarez, obviously, always good to have his voice. And what was interesting is, I don't have a chance to watch the game as it's happening because I'm up there. But obviously, the CBS commentators, Gary Danielson and Brad Nessler, were talking about the 4th and 1 call against USC, and they said there's a coach in Naples who probably wasn't pleased with that call. And Barry said that he texted him and said, "You are correct," because he said he would have gone under center. And Barry, obviously what's happening is much different from what it was when he was there. He did his best to walk this line of not criticizing the current staff. At the same time, I think it's pretty clear that everyone's looking at this product going, it's different and it's not necessarily better. I would say the voice that was most interesting is Joe Thomas because of the clout that he possesses, the talent that he was as a player. And I'll be honest, I talked to him for 40 minutes for this story and could not use almost like I probably used 3% of it because you can't use everything when you talk for somebody that long. But he's very honest about the identity, especially offensively. It's certainly not what it was when he was here, that you could rely on the run game and the offensive line, and you knew that you were going to be able to dominate. And he said one of the things he looks at is Wisconsin right now putting these guys in the best position to be able to execute? And I think in some of these situations, they're very clearly not. So there's a lot of frustration. Obviously, the guys on social media putting it out there amplifies it. And Luke has to do his best to ignore it. But also, I think if you're a player, you're seeing that. And I can't imagine they're not discussing it in some capacity.
Let's be fair about this. And Joe Thomas, I think, mentioned it as well. You're going to play a couple hard games a year. And whether it's Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Iowa, okay. But then you can go and dominate every other team. The run game can dominate every team. But let's not just gloss over the fact that many of times, and why it was always the Wisconsin is a quarterback away from being, the best, one of the best teams in the country, is because against those good teams, they were not always able to run the ball. They could not establish their will and force it down every single team's throat. And that's the games that they would end up losing, the games that they couldn't be more dynamic. So I know we're doing a lot of revisionist history on this, what the last 30 years had been. But at least no matter what, anything else, what you could say is that's who they wanted to be. And that's who they were on a large amount of the time. That's who they were. They were beat you up in the trenches, both sides of the ball, and power their will or make it so the other team didn't want to be there because you knew it was coming and you couldn't stop it. That was the identity. And this one is obviously still searching for that, almost 2 years in.
It is. I thought another thing that Joe talked about is you can't ignore that this is such a different era with the NIL and the transfer portal. And I don't want to make it sound like that is an excuse because every team is dealing with it. But I thought it was interesting when he did say, like, when I was playing, you knew you were going to have a couple hard games a year, kind of like what you were mentioning before. You might play Ohio State or Penn State or Iowa. And he said, like, it's a totally different landscape now because the talent is more spread out and people have this expectation of what Wisconsin should be. And it's a lot more challenging now. Now, that does to some degree sound like excuse making, but it is at least different with what Wisconsin has to deal with right now. Obviously, that's Luke Fickell's job to figure it out. And I also think I asked this question to pretty much everybody of like, okay, well, if you're not satisfied with the results, what is a reasonable time frame then that you're willing to give somebody? And to a man, they all said 4 years because that allows you the opportunity to recruit your own guys, to develop them, to get them to when they are upperclassmen and see whether this program will look different. And I think that's a pretty reasonable response. Now, I don't know that the entire staff will be here that long because if you're not successful, Luke is probably going to make some changes. But it's this wait and see approach where they're balancing the frustration with giving him enough time to do something different.
They are. And the former players, they do hold clout. And the ones that you talk to, obviously, certainly hold clout in this program. And Barry still does and all that. But, I feel like it's what we're seeing on social media is probably just a little bit of what is actually out there in terms of people being upset. Joe Schobert said, people, I personally won't go on social media and talk about things that are upsetting me about this program, but other guys certainly have, and they're more than welcome to. But that there's a bunch of guys that are deciding not to go to social media and talking about it, but are talking about it among themselves and are disappointed and not happy with the way things are trending at this point. I don't know what that means for Fickell, though. Like, I get that they're upset. I don't know how that impacts his ability to have a successful program. I do think the ones that have come out and the way that they have talked, I think kind of does impact. I think it kind of does. Like the Braylon thing, I certainly think it impacts the feeling around the program and people from the outside on the way looking in. Like, oh, is that a shit show in there? Like, do I want to walk into that? Like, I'm not saying it. I'm not saying that it's going to negatively impact them. They're never going to be able to get off the floor that they're on right now because of what Braylon said, but it's not helping. It's definitely not helping.
None of it is helpful for the program. And again, this is part of that balance that Luke has to strike, where like, I don't think you can completely ignore what these things that are being said. On the other hand, you're trying to prepare week by week. I do wonder though, how much the players are looking at that. And the JJ Watt thing, the shotgun 4th and 1, obviously we've talked about that. You can debate what formation you should be in, because Lucas said it comes down to blocking. But when JJ Watt, a dude who's got over 5 million followers on X, says that, that's going to become a story. And Jack Sitchie, who obviously doesn't necessarily have the following of a JJ Watt, but is I think, beloved Badger, certainly for what he did at Wisconsin and the injuries that he fought through, goes on social media and says, like, I want to be respectful, but there's no visible identity. The air is, in fact, not being rated. What happened to our defense? All these things. Those things become talking points. And that comes back to the players and certainly Luke. And so it's a part of this story, but it's his job to figure out how to elevate this. And this, Barry said this, like, people are going to be upset. And you know how you quell that is you win games. And that's all that matters. And I think Joe mentioned this too. His concern is this is a results business and there's no other way around it. So you can talk in circles about what's happening or what isn't or what is or what should be, but all that matters is whether you win games. And until that happens at a more consistent rate, this is going to continue to be something that we talk about. And certainly I think former players talk about in voicing their frustrations.
Would if Paul Chryst was still the coach, would these frustrations be being put out there publicly?
I think there might be some, but I think it would certainly be different because of the respect that he commanded as a longtime Badger. But I also think if they were 500 for 4 straight years or something like that, there would be frustrations. But yeah, I mean, it's different. It just is, because they brought in a guy who, while he had tremendous success somewhere else, has no ties to the program here. And therefore the former players have no ties to him while they respect the program. I think, yes, that does create a little bit more discourse.
Some of them are still pissed. They're pissed still. They're upset about how that all went down in 2022. They're still upset. And it, like, they have every right to come out and be upset about it and say what they are. But I think we have to at least acknowledge some of that when we're talking about, or at least looking at some of the things that are coming out from a guy like Jack Sitchie, who I love covering Jack Sitchie. He would always say what was on his mind. And, Braylon Allen, the way that he talked last year, best coach in the game, best coach in college football, and then to come out and be the way that he has right now, not a fan of that. I mean, he can say whatever he wants, but like, dude, you're singing quite the different tune. You were a company guy last year, and now you're going online and going against it. If you're going to say that, just come out and say it. Like, yeah, I mean, I don't need. It's kind of like I know something you don't know. It's like when these people, just come out and say it. I have all these horrible things that happened last year, but I'm going to wait to talk about it on a podcast someday. Like, no one listens to podcasts. What are we doing? No, I'm kidding. Like, but I understand. Like, they have a connection to Paul Chryst and a love for Paul Chryst and the way that things happened. Whether it was Paul Chryst or Jim Leonard, they still feel a certain type of way about it.
Yeah, a couple things on that. Obviously this frustration comes from a place from everybody of supporting this program and wanting them to be successful. So for the most part, I don't think these guys are like trying to sabotage the program so that they'll be horrible. The Braylon one is certainly interesting. To me, that felt like throwing the program under the bus in a way that others aren't. But I think he would still want Wisconsin to be successful. I do think there's a lot of respect for Luke Fickell for what he's done. And I mean, like I talked to Vince Beagle and his comments didn't make it into the story because I just couldn't include everybody. But he was here for the homecoming game a year ago with Ohio State, met Luke, met the staff, has a lot of respect for him. Joe Schobert's last year in Tennessee, he said Mike Vrabel was his coach. And so obviously the topic of Luke is going to come up. And so I think they think that Luke is certainly capable of doing this and they want him to be able to succeed. But you're right. There is a difference between being someone who was a Paul Chryst guy and seeing what it was like there and seeing what it's like now. I think that can lend itself toward even more frustration.
Yeah. Look, when Braylon's tweet went out, it got then posted on, and you can go through likes if you want to and see who liked it and who didn't. You can also it's a lot easier to do that on Instagram. And when that was posted on Instagram under some different accounts, there are a number of current players that were favoring it. And I think that is, I'm not going to sit here and like try and decipher what that like means. I'm just saying that there is, it just was, it didn't feel necessary. But I think he was also frustrated. And I think he is, which I can totally understand. He was recruited by Paul Chryst, recruited by Jim Leonhard. And yes, he played for Luke Fickell last year, but I think that there is still that commitment to the previous regime, and him coming out and saying that is probably just, I think, more frustration than anything else. I'm not pretending that there's not something behind that in terms of like things that went wrong last year and all the, the whispers and all, whatever he wants to put out there. But it just felt more about his love for the other two than it was about the hate for Paul Chryst. But I guess we'll see how it plays out. Was there anything else in the story that kind of jumped out for you?
Honestly, I feel like there was more to the things that I didn't include, which I don't know, how worth getting into it is. Like Joe just got back from 9 months he was with the Munich Ravens. So he was in Germany and I was going to ask,
did he go for what was his formation on 4th and 1?
This is awesome. He took me through his entire plan. So yeah, they were in the European Football League. He was the offensive line coach and he was the run game coordinator. And he said that they went this is what he said. They went 29 for 30 in the short yardage, 3rd and 1 type situations. And I'm blanking on exactly what the play call was, but it was I think it was a lot of toss plays or quarterback sneaks where you knew you were going to have your blocker out in front of you. And it just consistently worked, which is why he went back to, he's looking at this and he's looking at the 4th and 1 against Alabama, which he said was a terrible call. And saying are we putting these guys in the best position to be successful? You need to know what the expectation is, who you're going to block, what the other team is going to do. So it was a very lengthy response on how he dialed up the short yardage plays. And then at the end, when we were still talking, so he was here for the Alabama game. He had to go back to Germany to get his stuff. I think he said he came back with 4 70-pound bags of stuff. And so he didn't have a chance to watch the USC game, but then he pulled up the 4th and 1 and he literally diagrammed everything that went wrong on that play. So again, it was fascinating insight into the X's and O's of football, but not really something that applied to the story that I was writing. But yeah, I think did
he tell you?
What's that? Of what went wrong?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I think we saw what happened.
Right, but from a football perspective.
So now I'd have to go back and look, which is the worst thing of all, to tease a conversation, not have the details.
So I don't know if you have a chance to go back and look. I can maybe filibuster here for a second.
All right, I'm going to find it.
Yeah, so I had an opportunity to talk with a former tight end earlier this week, and not former Wisconsin tight end, but a former NFL tight end, and I was asking him about that particular play and the guy that comes unblocked, and I'm like, whose responsibility is that? And he's like, if they're pulling those two guys, then it's the quarterback's responsibility, because if you have nobody left over there to block him, then he's unblocked. You can't have him be unblocked. So it's the quarterback's responsibility to read him. And if he's crashing down like the USC guy did, he's got to hold it and, keep it and take off and run. And that's obviously not something that Braden Locke is known for. I certainly think if Tyler Van Dyke was in that game and they were in that exact same situation, maybe USC plays it differently. But if he gets the same read that Braden Locke got, he's keeping the ball and going. It was also the thought that like maybe Braden Locke was told you don't have a choice. You have to give it to him, which I can't believe is actually what happened, because you're leaving in a guy when the Y call the play, you're leaving it unblocked. Like you can't do it. But did I give you enough time to find it?
Yeah, I wish I would have fully transcribed this answer, but essentially he's talking about, there needed to be communication about who everybody's got. And he says that the way they executed it, the backside guard goes down really hard, which I think we saw, right? That was Joe Brunner.
Yeah, he whiffed on his block. Yeah.
Right. And he says the double team goes up to a linebacker, which on paper sounds great, but obviously they, left the safety off the backside. There was a lengthy breakdown to what happened, and he felt like this needed to be communicated better and these guys needed to be in a better position. So I wish I could give you the entire response, but essentially he's looking at these back-to-back 4th and 1 situations and thinking like, what the hell are we doing, essentially? Which is interesting because they're 5 for 8 on 4th down this season, but when you're in 4th and 1 at Wisconsin and you go shotgun and you don't convert, that's going to be a big talking point.
We do realize that they went 1 for 2 against Alabama, right? Like it wasn't 0 for 1 on 4th and 1. They were 1 for 2. They managed to convert on a 3-yard run by Twee Walker late in that second half, or late in the first half, where it was still a game. I think it was 14-3 at the time, and he converted on a 4th and 1. It might have been the exact. Tucker Kraft was pulling, so it was at least somewhat similar to the first one, and they got it. It's execution. I know people hate to hear that. It's execution, but you're right. It's also about putting guys in a place to succeed and communicate who everybody has and know who to block. And certainly on the first Alabama one was a mix-up, and on the USC one, clearly a communication error of some type, or just a complete brain fart by Braden Locke, or maybe a lack of confidence of pulling it. But it's tough. We didn't get to talk to Phil Longo this week. Hopefully, we'll get to do that maybe next week.
Yeah, I believe we're supposed to talk to him on Monday. So
those are certainly things, and Braden obviously can be asked about it as well. But Phil's the one that's putting those guys in the position. He's making the calls. So I don't know. It's tough. It's tough to know exactly what they're all looking at and what they actually need to happen. All right, let's get into our picks for the week. As I mentioned earlier in the show, you went 2-4-1. I went 3-3-1. The season tally now, and it's getting a little closer. I'm down 3 games here, but that's fine. You are 19-15-1. I'm 16-18-1. And let's start with the game down at Texas A&M. Number 9 Missouri going to face the Aggies, who are ranked 25th in the country. Aggies 2.5-point favorites.
Got my trusty notebook, which never leads me astray except for when it does. Texas A&M lost the opener to Notre Dame, but they've won 4 in a row. I know Missouri's unbeaten, but I always inclined to pick the 12th man. So I think that the Aggies are going to cover.
Missouri has not been overly impressive this year, so I'm going to lean towards Texas A&M as well. There are not a lot of good games this week. If you're going to miss a week of college football, this is probably it. I believe that is the only top 25 matchup. I know that Miami is going out to Cal, and they're getting College Game Day for the first time ever. I think it's down to 5 teams or 5 schools that have not been I guess, Power 5 schools that have not hosted College Game Day yet, but not a lot of good games. So I went Big Ten the rest of the way here. And so Michigan State heading out to face number 6 Oregon. The Ducks are 23.5-point favorites.
The big numbers always scare me. I know Michigan State just lost by 31 at home to Ohio State, but yet the game before they only lost by 4 on the road to Boston College, and that's a pretty decent Boston College team. I feel like Michigan State is going to cover, and Oregon, they're playing better football. They started off slow, but like even if they win by 3 touchdowns, that's a pretty handy win, and yet the Spartans cover. So that's why I'm going to pick Michigan State.
I think I'll go with Michigan State as well. UCLA going to Penn State. The Nittany Lions ranked 7th in the country. They were favored by 28. A lot of big numbers here. That's kind of why I went this way also, because it's kind of it's an all or nothing proposition here.
Right. Well, UCLA is a bad team.
They are.
They are. They lost by 17 to LSU, 21 to Oregon, 29 to Indiana, 28, even though it's in Happy Valley, is just huge. So, like, even if you have one mistake and it's a pick 6 or something by UCLA, you're going to cover. So I think that the Bruins at least cover, but Penn State is going to roll.
I disagree. I think Penn State is going to roll, and they're going to roll by more than 28. Iowa going to Ohio State. Always a fun place for the Hawkeyes to play.
Yes.
Iowa is a 18.5-point underdog.
Man, Ohio State is so good. They have the number 1 scoring defense in the country. There's a big part of me that wants to say, well, Iowa's got a top 15 defense. They're always very stout. On the other hand, Ohio State is just so good. This is one of those numbers that gives me pause, but I think in the end, I'm going to go with the Buckeyes.
I mean, I think we can at least acknowledge that Iowa's offense is improved, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, they scored 30 plus in 3 of their 4 games. The one time they didn't was against the one good team they played. And so I think this is a situation where where Ohio State's defense is going to smother that running game of Iowa's and wins by, I should say, covers that 18.5. Indiana, unbeaten Indiana, going on the road at Northwestern. The Hoosiers are 23rd, the 23rd ranked team in the country. I have a little stat for you before you actually pick this game. It's just the 3rd time since at least 1998 that Indiana has been a 14-point favorite on the road.
I like that nugget.
Can you guess the teams that they face that they on the road that they? I should say, yeah. I was going to go just Big Ten, but this is every game.
You want me to guess the other 2 where Indiana was a 2-touchdown favorite?
Yes. There was 3 games, but
is the COVID 2020 year one of them? Because they were good under Tom Allen.
No.
Then I don't know.
Okay. It was against Rutgers twice. 2019, I think it was 2017, and then the other one came back in 1998. And I did not write down. They went 1-2 against the spread.
Okay. Northwestern's offense is just not good. They just lost 24-5 against Washington. They had 112 yards of total offense. Meanwhile, Indiana is just, I know they have not played the Ohio States of the world yet, but they're averaging almost 50 points a game. They're in the top 25 for the first time since 1967. And I think they go in there and show why they're a top 25 team. So I think that the Hoosiers cover. I
agree. That has been, I mean, you could make the argument. I don't even know it's a tough one that Kirk Cincinnati is the coach, one of the coaches of the year, and maybe easily the hire of the year for Indiana, being in the spot that they are and just really changing around the momentum that had waned under the previous coaching staff. So I'm going to go Indiana as well. USC going on the road at Minnesota. Not a big number. It's 8.5 for the Trojans.
I think USC covers in this one. Throw it up to your athletes like we just saw last week. Give it to Jacoby Lane. Give it to Zachariah Branch. Just let Miller Moss dice dudes up. Minnesota doesn't have a winning record. They're not particularly good, and so I think that USC covers. I don't want to call out USC because Ben Kenny did that on the postgame show, and it resulted in about the entire fan base of USC, which I know it's not like a huge fan base, but like I'm not going to call them out and say that they're not a great team. I wasn't overly impressed with them
just overall. But their athletes are very, very impressive. But Minnesota's coming off a valiant effort at Michigan. Probably should have had an opportunity to either tie or win that game with that onside kick that they got called back for being offsides. They initiated a rule change as a result of that in the Big Ten, the placement of the official and where that's going to be. But I guess, you know what? I'm going to take USC as well. I don't feel great about that pick, though. I think this is a third straight week where USC has gotten beaten up the last couple of weeks with what both Wisconsin and Michigan did. Certainly more at Michigan than what Wisconsin did. But Minnesota's going to try and pound the ball at you as well. And will USC be able to hold up against it? Again, I want to say no, but I also just despise PJ Fleck. So I'm going to go with USC.
Oh, do you? This is the first I've heard.
Yeah, just I can't get myself to do it. I just can't. And it just doesn't. It's just not in the soul. Purdue at Wisconsin. The Badgers 13.5-point favorites. They have not lost to Purdue since 2003. It's a streak of 17 straight wins, highlighted by the famous, or I should say initiated by the famous game down in West Lafayette in 2004. Since then, Purdue has been horrible. They have, I think they won 6 games in Big Ten play. I think it was 4 of the 6 years, 4 or 6 years leading into that game, they had won at least 6 games in the Big Ten 4 times in 6 years. After that, they didn't do it again until 2019. They were 15-23 in Big Ten play. I should say they were 38-20 in Big Ten play before that game, 15-23 after that game, the 5 seasons after that game. It was a complete, absolute 180 for that program after that game.
My lone defense would be Purdue appeared in the Big Ten championship game more recently than Wisconsin, even though the Badgers won. So they'll always have that going for them.
Yes, congratulations to Jeff Brom and company.
You want to talk about a game that I don't feel good about? This is one of them. I'm going to pick Wisconsin to cover. I mean, that confidence is not especially high. Is Braden Locke going to complete more than 50% of his passes? Will the running game show something a little bit more now that you don't have Chez Mellusi? Yeah, Purdue just fired Graham Harrell, the offensive coordinator. Sometimes those kinds of things can create a spark. On the other hand, it's not like Purdue was particularly good. They got hammered by Notre Dame. They've got 1 win this season. This is one of those where I feel like, and I've said this a couple times before, if Wisconsin doesn't house Purdue, I don't know what to say about the next.
Are you going to say no. fold the program? No, we're not folding the program.
Like you talk about the get right games and how many truly winnable games on paper there are. You got to show that you can do something a little bit more than what we've seen to date. Maybe the first half USC Wisconsin shows up and plays really good football. I know a lot of people are hoping for that to give you some optimism about the fact you got to go on the road to play a very good Rutgers team and then Northwestern. And if you're not 2-1 or 3-0 in that stretch, that bowl game is going to be very challenging. So all that is to say, this is a game I think Wisconsin has to be able to dominate. They have not done that even in the low-level matchups they've had. But this Purdue team is obviously in disarray right now.
They are in disarray. Wisconsin has not been great by any stretch. They've shown we saw a half of football that you can certainly live with last week. I should say more than live with based on what we had seen previous to that. So I'm going to say Wisconsin covers at home as well. I think they do win the game. I think they have success running the ball, and I think they have success throwing a little bit. My question is defensively, what does Hudson Card have? Because he was but they were in that game at home last week against Nebraska. They were in it until halftime, and then after halftime, things kind of fell apart for them. They have put up fights against some of the other teams they have. They didn't against Notre Dame, no doubt. But this is I wonder if they come out and play with a little bit of fight after your offensive coordinator leaves and you're kind of with your back up against the wall, and they probably see Wisconsin in the same way that Wisconsin sees Purdue, as teams that hasn't played great football. And maybe we can get our season back on track. But
Right.
I'm gonna say Wisconsin over Purdue in that game, 11 a.m. kickoff on Saturday. We'll be back to discuss it. We'll get back to our normal schedule next week, where we have 3 shows. Been a little bit off the last couple of weeks, but we'll be talking. I feel confident we'll be talking about a win, and if we're not, maybe we'll just fold the show. I don't know. We'll see. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Jesse, enjoy the game, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, there he is, Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.